in any event, what I want to talk about today is an issue having to do with Kashrus, but not only Kashrus. Throughout the length and breadth of Torah, ne'emanut, trustworthiness, who is considered trustworthy according to Halacha. Now, this, of course, touches upon Kashrus, which hechsherim are good, which neighbors we can rely upon, and so forth and so on. But it touches upon many other areas. Everything in Torah has to do with ne'emanut, with reliability and trustworthiness. But before I come to that, let me ask you if you have any questions of a halachic nature you wish to begin with. Yes, Shmuel.
Shalom. Hi, Shalom Rav Fink. I wanted to know if I show up to a Taimani minyan.
Oh no.
It's so different on so many accounts. If an Ashkenazi shows up to a Sephardi minyan or the reverse, there's a lot more that maybe is like, oh, okay, I can adjust more easily. If I show up to a Taimani minyan, there are a lot of major public things with Kedusha, Devarim Kedusha in public. How do I adapt? Still be yotzei, to still be respectful, I don't even know where to begin really. So I'm fumbling over the question.
Of course, it depends upon how firm you want to be. Let me address the issue in general. There's as with so many other things, there's a machlokas, a disagreement between Sephardic authorities and Ashkenaz authorities. This is conflict between Ashkenaz authorities and Sephardic authorities on your question, how to deal with your question. This is an irresolvable machlokas. This is a disagreement which has no solution. Let me outline the two positions. According to Ashkenaz poskim, you should conform to the minhag of the place where you are at the moment. If you are at the moment in a Taimani minyan, an Iraqi minyan, a Hasidic minyan, a Litvish minyan, whatever it is, according to Ashkenaz poskim, you should conform to the practice of the minyan in which you find yourself at the moment. This has to do with things which you say out loud and others will hear you. Things which you do not say out loud, like the text of the silent prayer, the Amidah. Well, there's no problem there in contradicting the local practice because no one hears you in the silent prayer. So there you can stick to your own minhag. But anything which would be noticeable as a deviation from the practice of the minyan, you should conform to the local practice. That's the Ashkenaz approach. Therefore, for example, if you're saying Kaddish in a minyan where they have a text of Kaddish different than your own, according to the Ashkenaz poskim, you should conform to the text of the minyan, the shul in which you are visiting at the moment. Now, that's the Ashkenaz approach. The approach of the Sephardic poskim is just the opposite. According to the Sephardic poskim, everyone should always maintain his or her own home minhag, and therefore, for example, if you're visiting in a shul where they have a different text of Kaddish, you should stick with your own home minhag, and even though that's going to be different than the minhag of the people amongst whom you are davening at the moment. Therefore, if an Ashkenazi is visiting in a Sephardi shul, the Ashkenazi says, well, I'm going to use your nusach of Kaddish, and they say, no, use yours. And if it's the other way around, the Sephardi visiting in the Ashkenaz shul, the Ashkenazim say, no, you have to use our nusach. You're here in an Ashkenaz shul. And they say, no, we stick with our home nusach. Well, this is an irresolvable conflict in Yerushalayim today, where there's so many mixed minyanim. The common practice in in Yerushalayim today, which I've observed, is anything goes. It really doesn't matter. Everyone does whatever he or she wants. That's a common practice here. Now, that said, there's a very important tshuva of the Marashdam, Rav Shmuel de Medina. Marashdam, Rav Shmuel de Medina, he was the great posek of Turkey in the generation after the expulsion of the Jews from Spain. I'm not exactly sure where he was born. If he was born in Spain, he was just a baby at the time of the expulsion, and he grew up in Turkey, or maybe he was actually born already in Turkey. I don't know exactly where he was born, but he was from that generation right after the expulsion of the Jews from Spain. Now, of course, when the Jews were expelled from Spain, they ended up all over the place, in Amsterdam, in Hamburg, in London, in Rhodos, in Alexandria, all over the place, in Smyrna. And for the first time in Jewish history, we now have the local indigenous Jewish population, which has been there for an awful long time. The indigenous Jewish population of Turkey has been there since the days of Bayez Rishon, and they had their minhagim. And next door, the newcomers, the Sfaradim, built Sephardic shuls according to the Spanish minhag. Now we have two synagogues in the same town with conflicting minhagim. This is the first time in Jewish history where this happened. And it happened not only in Smyrna, in Turkey, well, it happened wherever the Sfaradim arrived, in London, in Alexandria, all over the Jewish world. And the Maharajdan was asked by a local Turkish Jew whose family had been living in Turkey since the days of Bayez Rishon, and they had their minhagim. The Turkish Jew asked the Maharajdan, which minhag should I follow when I'm occasionally davening in the Sephardic shul? Now comes the answer of the Maharajdan, and the answer is so important, so fundamental. Here are his holy words, and I quote him. Maybe I make a few mistakes in the quotation, almost exactly. Lo ra'inu, velo matzinu, lo b'divrei Hazal, velo b'divrei Harishonim. We know of no source anywhere in Talmudic literature and nowhere amongst the Rishonim, the great medieval authorities, we know of no source. She'adam hayav lishmor minhag avotav. We see no source calling upon us to follow the minhagim of our families, our traditional minhagim, chutz minhagei isur, aside from prohibitive minhagim. Now minhagim divide into two categories. There are minhagim which are prohibitive, lo ta'aseh, don't eat rice on Pesach, don't do this, don't do that, all kinds of prohibitive minhagim. And there are minhagei kum v'aseh, minhagim where you do things, wrap tefillin this way, wrap tefillin that way, daven with this nusach, daven with that nusach. Well, without exception, every single minhag mentioned in Talmudic literature, without exception, every single minhag mentioned in the Rishonim, the great medieval authorities, and we're talking about a ton of examples, every single one of them is a minhag of prohibitive nature. If you have a minhag not to do something, then you shouldn't do it, even if you're visiting amongst a community where they do that. But a minhag kum v'aseh, the text of the siddur that you use, minhagim, things that you do, feel free to switch at your convenience. Switch back and forth a few times a day. Do whatever you want. It doesn't matter in the slightest. I'm reminded of what I once heard from the Amshinover Rebbe, the old Amshinover Rebbe. I asked him once, which nusach, which siddur is the best siddur to daven from? He looked at me and then he waved his hand to the tables in the base of Midrash and he said, choose a siddur, any siddur, they're all good. The ikar is that you daven. Well, this is exactly in line with the thinking of the Maharsham. Um, uh, so, as far as minhagei kumuv aseh are concerned, if we, now, everything I've said flies in the face of the thinking of the Khatam Sofer. The Khatam Sofer is strongly, strongly opposed to everything I have said so far. The Khatam Sofer,
Bulgaria.
yeah, the Khatam Sofer insisted on keeping minhag. The changing the slightest minhag is wrong, 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 according to the Khatam Sofer. He thought that the smallest uh, trivial, I mean, there's no such thing as a trivial minhag. Every minhag is kadosh, and you're not never allowed to change anything. You have to keep the religion exactly the way your parents did, your great parents did through the generations. Not allowed to change anything. Now, this idea of the Chassam Sofer gained great currency, great popularity amongst Ashkenaz poskim, and you'll see this repeated over and over again. As far as modern poskim are concerned, the Igros Moshe, Reb Moshe Feinstein, was the great voice which rejected the approach of the Chassam Sofer. And although he did not name the Maharsham specifically, he he seems to have embraced the opinion of the Maharsham, the voice of Rav Moshe Feinstein, the Igros Moshe in North America. He was the greatest of the rabbis of North America in the 20th century. His was the voice which said, keep Judaism, keep Torah any way you wish. Just make sure that everything is halachically correct. You don't want to dress like your parents and grandparents did. You don't want to wear this kind of hat and that kind of frock. Well, feel free to dress as an American. Just make sure there's no shatnez. You want to structure your Shabbos meal differently than your parents and grandparents did. You don't want gefilte fish, and you don't want Jewish food. Fine. So you want to have Jewish food. Just make sure that it's kosher. That's all. You want to eat pizza like Americans do? Fine. Let's just make sure it's kosher, and let's talk about how many slices are going to require in the Tilas Yadayim and Birkas Hamazon. Make sure everything is halachically correct, and you're free to live your life as you wish. That was the voice that the Americans loved to hear. And he was not the only one, but he was one of the few rabbis who voiced this approach, as opposed to the so many others who were following in the footsteps of the Chassam Sofer. No, you dare not change anything. You must speak the language of your parents and grandparents. You must educate your children exactly the way they educated their children. You must dress just as they dressed. Everything has to stay the same. Well, these two approaches continue to battle it out today. Is that enough of a response? Okay. Any other?
Yeah,
Rabbi.
Okay,
I was
well,
curious specifically in
Yeah.
a Taimani minyan though, when they do like blessings for like before and after the Shema, and there's certain things that are like just so different that I'm not sure what to do. And do I just do I Shema Kona, and that's what
Yeah.
everyone's doing, I think.
Well, of course, you can follow their minhag of just sitting and listening to the Shliach Tzibur, who says everything out loud. That's okay. That's okay. And incidentally, it's not only the Teimanim. There are followers of the Gra. There's a large community centered in the Old City today, in the Jewish quarter of the Old City. The Silberman, Rabbi Silberman has a yeshiva with a big community. They follow exactly this same approach. Only the Shliach Tzibur recites the brachas out loud before Shema, and after Shema, everyone just listens and says Amen. The words of Kriya Shema, everyone says. If you're at peace with that, go for it. following the local minhag, as Ashkenaz poskim say you're supposed to do, the Ashkenaz poskim also point out that if you are unfamiliar with the local minhag and it's going to confuse you and you're going to end up doing things improperly because you're just not used to it. Well, if you're not going to fulfill the basic mitzvah, of course, you have to fulfill the mitzvah, even if that means deviating from the local practice. Okay.
Thank you. This is really, really interesting. Thank you for all of that.
Now, you did
Fascinating.
you did have a comment? Yes, you did.
Yeah. I had written to you my question about the trustworthiness. And I
Yes,
don't know if you saw it. So anyway,
yes,
I was wondering if you
I
found
did,
it. Yes.
I did, and
Okay.
I had not been intending to talk about it, but as you point out, it's a terribly important question, and we are definitely going to get to it.
Okay. Toda.
Here goes. Let me get the sources on the screen. I click here, and then I click here. Oh, I think I did it. Oh, but I lost chat. Now I lost chat. Oh, now I got chat back. Okay. Um, it says in the Yoredea, Hachashud le'echol dvarim asurim, anyone whom we suspect of not keeping kosher, בין אם הוא חשוד באיסור Torah, בין אם הוא חשוד באיסור דרבנן, doesn't matter whether we suspect the person, not for sure, but we suspect this person eats things which are not kosher min Torah or things which are not kosher min Rabbanan, ein lismoch alav. You can't rely upon that person. That person does not have ne'emanut, reliability, trustworthiness. Now, this is not only a principle of Kashrus. This is b'chol haTorah kula. If a garment it has to be free of shatnez, um, who is trustworthy to declare this garment is free of shatnez and you can wear it? Well, if the Jew who is making the statement is Torah observant, if the person who is making the statement cares about the mitzvah, and he or she, of course, would never wear a shatnez garment themselves. The person making the statement about the food being kosher is someone who cares about kashrus, and he or she would not eat something which is not kosher. Well, if they care about the mitzvah, and the way we know they care about the mitzvah is because they keep the mitzvah, then they have ne'emanut, trustworthiness, and aid echad ne'eman be'isurim, the single voice of that one person saying, testifying, saying, this food is kosher, or this garment is free of shatnez, or whatever the issue is, trustworthy and reliable. Now, at this point, there's a big machlokes between them and us. According to Sephardic poskim, what I have just said applies flat out in every situation. But according to Ashkenaz poskim, led by the Ramah, this is not always correct. According to the Ramah, according to Ashkenaz poskim, you can rely upon someone who cares about the mitzvah, someone who is Torah observant, unless there's money involved. According to the Ashkenaz poskim, as soon as there is money involved, the person loses his or her trustworthiness. If someone is inviting you for a meal and you're not paying for it, or if someone is bringing you a gift of food and you're not paying for it, well, if the person is Torah observant, of course you can trust that person that it's kosher or that the garment is free of shatnez or whatever the issue is. Oh, but as soon as there's money involved, then we have a problem. According to the Ramah, Yesh omrim afilu mamisha eno chashud, even someone who is Torah observant, big beard with a payas and a frock, even a person who's no reason to think chas v'shalom, that person eats tray food, rak shein makirin oto shu muchsak b'kashrus, just the person is not well known and accepted in the community as providing kosher items, asur liknot mimenu. You can't buy yayin or anything else which has a kashrus issue. So according to Sephardic poskim, if the merchant is Torah observant, and just like in a private situation of eating in private in someone's home without paying, or receiving a gift of food without paying, of course, Torah observant people are reliable, but as soon as money is involved, you need a higher standard of trustworthiness, and that standard is muchzak bekashrus. The merchant has to be someone who is well known in the community and accepted in the community as being kosher, not an ordinary citizen. For example, in my holy community where I live, which is wall to wall Haredim, there's this guy downstairs in the machsanim, and he converted one of the machsanim into a little kitchen and restaurant service. On Thursday nights. He serves cholent, huge amounts of cholent, huge amounts. I mean, these huge vats of cholent. It's amazing how much he sells. Fleischik, I don't know about everyone, but in general, in the community, he's trustworthy. I see many people in the community are buying his cholent and eating it. Here we have someone who is muhsak, accepted by the community as being kosher. And therefore, even though there's money and you pay for it, that's his business, it's okay. So this is a big machlokas. But now uh, we have to realize that as far as this issue is concerned, Ashkenazim are stricter. And if the back in the good old days, when all was right with the world, and you lived in a little shtetl, and everyone knew everyone else, and well, there was the Jewish baker, and everyone knew the Jewish baker. There was the Jewish butcher, and everyone knew the Jewish butcher. And of course, the single Jewish butcher in town was muhsak bekashrus. Everyone accepted his kashrus, and the baker everyone knew, and the tailor who provided kosher clothing without shatnez. Back in the good old days, well, everyone knew everyone else in the little villages, and all was well. Nowadays, when no one knows anyone because we live in such a huge community, now some kind of hashgacha, some kind of rabbinic supervision has come into play. And for better or worse, there's a lot of money involved in rabbinic supervision. Tons of money are involved. And cynical people like me, of course, get very nervous as soon as something turns into a business affair. But let me give you the history, and you'll understand right away what the problem is. This all began back in the days of Rav Kook. Back in the days of Rav Kook, initially the Jewish community in Eretz Israel was pretty small. There weren't a lot of Jews here before the 18th century. And there were small communities all over the place. There were small communities in Yerushalayim, in Tveria, in Yafo, in Tzfat. There were communities all over, but they were small. They were small, and again, everyone knew everyone. And back in those days, everyone was shomer mitzvahs, and everyone trusted the local butcher, and everyone trusted the local tailor, and so forth and so on. In the 18th century, 19th century, in the beginning of the 20th century, with Aliyah, the number of people, the number of non-Torah observant people, the number of Chilonim increased dramatically here in Eretz Israel. And the problem of hashgacha, the problem of rabbis giving approval to restaurants and caterers and food suppliers became a big problem back in the days of Rav Kook. Now, as Rav Kook points out in a published tshuva, I did not tell him to publish the tshuva, but he thought it's important, so he published his tshuva. Back in those days, he published a tshuva in which he made the following simple, straightforward observation. If you have a restaurant or a caterer or any food supplier who is not Torah observant, and all the workers in the restaurant are either non-Jews or not Torah observant, well, there's no reason why anyone should trust them for being kosher. We know they don't care about Kashrus because they eat non-kosher food. Why then should we trust them? And his conclusion is that there is no reason we should trust them, and they have no ne'amanut. But of course, the rabbanut, the rabbis, want as much as possible as much as is practical, we want to have as much kosher food available. We want to do what we can to improve the situation. And therefore, Rav Kook decided that the rabbanut would supply two levels of supervision, and therefore two different kinds of certification, two different texts, two different kinds of certificates to put on the wall. If the caterer, the food supplier, is far from any Torah observance, then we will send a rabbi there occasionally to check things out, and we will certify them, and we will write on the certificate that this institution, this restaurant, this caterer, this food supplier is tahat hashkachatenu, under supervision, under our supervision, which is true. We do send a rabbi to check every once in a while, and it's true, it's under supervision. But it's not quite the same as saying that it's kosher. If the caterer is Torah observant, or if the workers are Torah observant, then they have the status of being ne'eman, they have the status of being trustworthy. And if that's the case, then we can write on the certificate that this establishment is kosher. So according to Rav Kook, there's a difference between certifying that a store, a restaurant, a food supplier, a caterer, whatever it is, there's a difference between certifying that they are kosher, which means halachically all is well, as opposed to certifying that they are under supervision, which is true, but not quite the same as asserting that everything is kosher. When I first read the tshuva of Rav Kook eons ago, when I was the merest whippersnapper, whipping and snapping all over town, I said, wow, this is interesting. And the next day I happened to be in a fish store in Mea Shearim, and I noticed the certification of the Eda Haredis on the wall. This fish store is certified as being kosher. Okay. Then my feet took me to Machane Yehuda, and I found another fish store in Machane Yehuda also with a certificate of the Eda Haredit on the wall, and this certificate said the store is Tahat Hashkachatenu, under our supervision. So this distinction turns out to be an important distinction. Now, let me go one step further. In Kashrus, as in everything else, as on every page of the Shulchan Aruch, there are machlokot, disagreements. Some rabbis hold this is permitted, other rabbis prohibit that, some rabbis prohibit this, some other rabbis permit it. You name it, there's always going to be some machloket. Now, one of the underlying principles of the Rabbanut is that each local Rabbanut, the Rabbanut of Kiryat Shmona, the Rabbanut of Eilat, the Rabbanut of every place, uh, each local Rabbanut acknowledges and accepts the Kashrus of every other Rabbanut. And of course, the different local rabbis, whether it's Kiryat Ono or Kfar Saba, of course, the local rabbis have different opinions. Rabbis disagree about what the halacha is on so many issues. And therefore, local kashrus standards vary from place to place. The rabbi in this town holds that such and such is acceptable, which is quite proper if that's what he holds, and therefore the food manufacturers and the restaurants and caterers are following that leniency. Well, once that food is in the system, once the manufacturer has gotten the approval of the local rabbanut, then that food will be accepted in every other rabbanut in Israel. This is a complicated way of saying that the system of the rabbanut sinks to its lowest common denominator. Everything in the system is kosher and acceptable according to someone, but it's a quilt. It's a combination of all the leniencies in all the different of all the different community rabbis. Now, not surprisingly, the Yatzranim, the manufacturers, not surprisingly, always are able to find, they always know which rabbi to get a certification for their factory. And therefore, if what you are seeking is a minimum standard of kashrus, which there's nothing wrong with that. If that's what you are seeking, one does not have to do tshuva, chas v'shalom, just because you're following this rabbi or that rabbi or a combination of this rabbi and that rabbi. When one could be a complete tzaddik and merit life and following the minimum standard of kashrus. If that's what you wish, then fine. That's the hechsher of the rabbanut, and that's perfectly acceptable. On the other hand, someone who wants to be more machmir than that, someone who would prefer to follow stricter opinions, will have to look for Mahadran Hechsherim, where the claim of where the certification of the Mahadran Hechsher is that the food is not only kosher according to some opinion, but rather it's kosher according to all of the principal poskim. That's the big difference. Now, that said, I just want to emphasize one more time that great poskim like Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach and Rav Yashiv and the others, although they personally sought out stricter hechsherim, always told people that, of course, you can rely upon the Rabbanut, and they themselves, if they found themselves in a place, didn't make inquiries about exactly which opinions were being followed in this caterer or that caterer. They were fine with the minimum standards of the Rabbanut. Let me take this idea one powerful step further. Here comes a powerful step. The Das Torah. Das Torah is the name of a sefer written by the Marasham. I mentioned before the Marashdam. That was Rav Shmuel de Medina in Turkey. Now I'm talking about the Marasham, Rav Shvadron from 19th century Lithuania. In his sefer Das Torah, he points out as follows. The case which he's discussing is a case of someone who is invited to a simcha, chasana, bris milah, I don't know what the simcha is, but someone who's invited to a simcha in another village. And the person being invited doesn't like the shochet, that village. And for his own home, he would never buy the meat uh, slaughtered by the shochet in that other village. Doesn't trust him. And of course, that is the food which is being served at the Simcha, to which he is invited. Now the question arises, what should he do? Should he refuse to eat the food? Should he, what should he do? According to the Das Torah, according to the Marasham, according to Rav Shvadron was his name, or Mordechai Shvadron, what he should do is eat the food. The reason he should eat the food is because the food has the approval of the local Rav. The local Rav in that village approves of the local shochet, and the Talmidei Chachamim, the Lamdanim, the Tzadikim in that village are eating that food, and even though you would not buy it in your own house, if you would refrain from eating it in a public way, where other people see you at a simcha, if you would refrain from eating it, you would be guilty of being mevaze. You would be guilty of insulting and embarrassing the rabbi who gives the hechsher. You would be guilty of bizayon, insulting and embarrassing the lamdanim, Talmidei Chachamim, and Tzadikim who are eating the food. And as the Mishnah teaches us, Hamavazeh, Talmidei Chachamim, someone who is guilty of insulting and embarrassing Talmidei Chachamim, Ein lo chelek lo'olam haba, that's very serious indeed. And therefore, you should eat the food and ignore your chashash, ignore your worries about it. And all of this applies, of course, only if you have worries, chshad. If you know definitively that the food is usher, not just something you suspect, but you know definitively that it's usher, then of course you can't eat it. But if it's only your chshad, only something you suspect might be wrong, you have to eat the food. And this is, of course, true. I suppose in every case, it's hard to imagine a case where this would not be true in an ordinary caterer, in an ordinary restaurant under the supervision of the local Rav, Rabbanut. It's hard for me to picture a case where you might know definitively that the food they're serving is prohibited. I can't picture a case how you would know that if such a case would arise. And of course, you cannot eat the food. But in general, it's just your suspicions, just your fears that they're not doing things right. You suspect them of not doing things right, but you don't definitively know. And therefore, according to the Das Torah, you should eat the food. Let's go one step further. According to the sources we have seen, ne'emanut, trustworthiness, depends upon whether or not the person making the statement is Torah observant. And incidentally, it's not necessary for the Torah observant person to speak out the words, this food is kosher, this garment is free of shatnez. It's not necessary to speak out the words, just serving you the food or selling you the garment is tantamount. That's equivalent to saying that it's kosher, and that's enough. You don't actually have to say the words. Now, according to the Igros Moshe, there's room, and this is a big chiddush of Rav Moshe Feinstein, and I don't, not all, many poskim disagree with him on this point, but listen to his reasoning and see if you find it reasonable. Back in the glorious days of Stalin, when all was right in the Soviet Union, before the wrong people came into power, back in the Stalin was one of the world's greatest leaders ever. He had very strong sense of morality and family values were incredibly important for him, and therefore he wanted to structure the society in a way that the whole extended family, grandparents, children, grandchildren, aunts, uncles, cousins, they would all live together in the same one-room apartment. Keep the families together. That was very important in Stalin's thinking. Now, back in those days, um, it was quite common that the older generation of Jews were Torah observant, and the younger generation were communists and not Torah observant. This was fairly common back in the days of Stalin. And once, when Rav Moshe Feinstein was visiting in Moscow, he was asked the following question by the grandparents who were Torah observant. The grandparents told Rav Moshe, there's one kosher butcher in Moscow. And our children, who are not Torah observant, tell us that they buy the meat at that kosher butcher. Now, of course, you can't tell just by looking at a piece of meat whether it's kosher or not. You can't tell by looking at a piece of meat whether it was properly slaughtered and whether the lungs were inspected properly. But my non-Torah observant children tell me that they brought this meat from the kosher butcher. Can I trust them? Well, according to the principles of ne'emanut, trustworthiness, which we've seen up till this point, the answer is no. We know that the children don't care about kashrus because we know that they eat non-kosher food. If they don't care about it, so why should it be trustworthy? That's what we've seen up till now. The chiddush of Rav Moshe Feinstein is as follows. One of the many differences between Dine Torah in a Bezdin and secular law in Western legal systems, one of the many differences is that in most Western legal systems, evidence or testimony must be presented to the court to prove everything which has to be proven. And at any point which has not been proven by evidence or testimony, it cannot be used as part of the decision, and it cannot be used in the decision-making process of the court. Halacha is different. In halacha, I'll give you a standard. Imagine that there's a financial conflict about some complicated contract, and they're suing each other. And one of the elements of the contract is that it works in different currencies. Uh, the money was lent in one currency, it's being repaid in another currency. All kinds of transnational issues which are possible in complicated contracts. And one fact which has to be established in order for the courts to reach its decision was the conversion rate on such and such a date. Well, in a non-Jewish, in a Western court, you would have to bring testimony or proof regarding what the exchange rate was on that date. And if you have proof or testimony, then that can figure in the decision-making process. In a Beit Din, in a rabbinic court, if the judges happen to know what the exchange rate was, it is as though they were there. They are their own witnesses as far as this fact is concerned, and they can take this fact into consideration because they know full well by their own knowledge what the facts are, and therefore that can be used as part of the decision-making process. Well, that's true in Dine Mominus. The name of this principle is Kimli. Let's get that typed on chat. Kimli means it's as though the Dayanim were standing there and saw the facts themselves. If that's true, then you don't need witnesses, you don't need testimony. The Dayanim just happen to know the facts. Well, Rav Moshe Feinstein's chiddush, his new idea, is that this idea can be extended to the principles of ne'emanut, the principles of reliability and trustworthiness. If the relationship between parent and child is obviously a long-term relationship. And the same would work between two acquaintances who are not family relatives. If you have a long-standing relationship, and in that long-standing relationship, you know that the other party has never lied to you, they've always been truthful, then you can trust them. You know that they are truthful and reliable if you have a long-term relationship with the person. And therefore, the Torah observant people in Moscow in the older generation who know that their children are always truthful with them, and the children say they bring the meat from the kosher butcher, so they can be trusted. And this works obviously if it's the children who are from and the parents who aren't, or even just two acquaintances, one of whom is from and the other isn't, if they've known each other for a long time and this relationship of trust exists, then you can trust the non-Torah observant person. Of course, this doesn't work in every family. This doesn't work in every situation. Some families, you know that they lie to you all the time. Well, if you know that your relative lies to you all the time, so of course you can't trust them. But in many situations, this leniency of Ramosha will go far, and controversial. This is a position which is accepted by many Rabbanim and can be relied upon. Okay, let's go further. How do I get this? Here we go. What about food production facilities, factories? The factory is not owned by Torah observant people, probably owned by non-Jews. The workers there are not Torah observant, probably non-Jews. You have a factory in China, a factory in India, who knows where it is. There are no Shomrei Torah around. Rav Moshe Feinstein wrote as follows: Yesh laha'amin lemin halei hafactory. We should believe, halachically, we should believe, we should have trust. We should trust and believe what the leaders, the minahel, the people who run the factory, we should trust them. B'mashe kotvim, when they write, if they give us a written certification, shemishtamshim rak b'shumen shena'asem vegetables v'chadomer. If they give a written certification, the non-Jews who manage the factory give a written certification that they use only vegetable oil and not lard in their baked products, you can rely upon that. You can rely upon their written statement that they are using vegetable oil, vegetable oil. If they certify that they're not using lard, you can rely upon it. Why? The reason they are trustworthy is a rule in the Gemara, Uman lo mara nafshe. A craftsman, a tradesman, someone whose business depends upon it, will not lie in a way that will adversely affect his or her business. And therefore, that's a reason why we can trust them. This by itself is not sufficient, but we have another reason to trust them. Avide leigluye, a situation where the facts are going to come out in any event. We're presently going to know the facts. Well, now we can trust what the managers of the factory say, since the truth can be tested in a laboratory and the facts can be proven. Why would they lie about something where the facts can be and will be established by laboratory testing? So here we have already two reasons to trust the managers of the factory. Why would they lie in a way that would adversely affect their business? And the facts are going to come out one way or another. Further, mishum mirtat ma'onish. Further, if there is, if we're talking about a country where fraud would be punished by the legal system, then the managers of the factory have to worry about defrauding the customers, and lying about the contents of the food would be an act of fraud, and they would be subject to penalties in whatever legal system they live in. Well, when we have a confluence of these reasons, Reb Moshe Feinstein held that is sufficient to rely upon, and therefore, in general, you buy a packet of biscuits in the supermarket. If you carefully study the list of ingredients and there's nothing there which is halachically suspicious, nothing there which is problematic, then you should be able to trust them. Of course, if one of the ingredients is filleted fish, now this is much more suspicious. After all, the only way to know whether a fish is kosher is to have seen the fins or the scales. Once it's filleted, they're no longer fins or scales. Now, how on earth are the minahalim supposed to know whether or not it's kosher? They don't know anything about the rules of kashrus, and therefore the statement of the minahalim that it's kosher means nothing. There's no reason to think that they know the halachas or care about the halachas of kosher. But whether something is made with vegetable oil or lard, that's something they do care about. That's a difference which is important for them. And therefore, that statement would be ne'aman, would be reliable and trustworthy, according to the Igros Moshe. Now, we're left with one major problem, and that is being a guest in someone's home where there's conflict of minhagim. The host is makel and holds that such and such is permissible. The guest is from and doesn't eat such and such. The question now arises, who should conform to the other practice? Regarding this, the opinion of the Shach in his commentary on the Yoredeya is more or less universally embraced. According to the Shach, it is the obligation of the host. The obligation falls on the host not to serve the guest food that the guest would not want to eat. It's not the obligation of the guest to ask whether or not the food conforms to his or her requirements. Rather, it's the obligation of the host to make sure that all is well for the guest. Now, this strikes me as being not only a halachic position, this strikes me as being a simple matter of politeness. Your guest is allergic to this or that. Well, of course, it becomes the obligation of the host not to serve this or that to the guest who's allergic to it. It has nothing to do with halacha particularly, just has to do with common politeness. The not only if the guest is allergic to this or that, could be the guest doesn't like this or that, can't stand anchovies. Well, if the guest cannot stand anchovies, then why on earth would the host want to serve anchovy pizza to that person? It strikes me as being not purely a halachic issue, but a simple matter of politeness. That of course it's the host who should conform to the requirements of the guest. Now, as far as halacha is concerned, the Shach goes to great length to prove this according to halachic sources, but it seems to me that this is a principle which should apply even outside of the realm of pure halacha. Dov, these are my principal comments about Kashrus. Now, let me ask you if you have any questions.
Shalom, Fink. I was
Yes.
wondering if there is another way to prove that they care about the mitzvah, even if they're not keeping it.
How do we know that they keep mitzvahs?
No. So, is there another way to prove that they care about the mitzvah, even if they themselves are not keeping it, or is that not possible?
No. What we can demonstrate based on a long-term relationship is that they're honest.
Got it. So we can also, same thing with the ESEC, the company, we know that they're gonna be honest about the vegetable oils versus the lard, because we can prove that they'll be honest about it because of the other 2 points that followed above.
The confluence of these reasons: number one, the facts will be established in any event. There's no reason for them to act in a way which would adversely affect their business. And in Western countries, there are, of course, laws against fraud, and they would be penalized for defrauding the customers.
And even if it didn't come out, that even if it wasn't going to be tested, there's it's looming above them like that it could be.
All you need is the possibility of testing, correct?
Thank you. That's so interesting.
Okay, yes.
No?
Yes, I got you. Yeah.
Yes, but Rav, so I have question. What's now, if we buy the meat, what's the difference between tachat hashgacha בפיקוח? Which one is the stringent one and which one is the general one?
No, but they both mean the same thing. They
They are
both mean that the rabbis have checked the store.
But there is one that from Mea Sharim you mentioned that they check every.
It does not have pikuach and does not have hashgacha, just says kosher.
Just says kosher is the one that is a
That's
general
that's the
kashrut.
highest level. That's the highest level.
Just kosher is the highest one?
Yes. When the rabbis are certifying it is kosher, you can eat it. Tachat hashgacha, tachat pikuach just means that they send a rabbi there occasionally, but they don't have a rabbi there all the time. And all they can say is that they occasionally check it.
And if it's written kasher, kasher badatz or kasher general?
Kasher badatz or She'erit Yisrael or whatever the organization is.
It has to have a name to it, kasher, and name, not just Rabbanut.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I think
Yes.
I'm not. What's the situation then with money and kashrut hashgacha?
With money,
If there's a problem where money is involved, and with hashgacha money is involved.
Yeah. If there's a profit, then it's not enough that the people, according to Ashkenaz poskim, it's not enough that the butcher or the tailor be Torah observant. He must be someone who is accepted by the community as muchzak b'kashrus. The community accepts the reliability of that person.
But I mean, in terms of the kashrus agencies, the certification agencies, there's money involved there. Does that not?
Yeah, well, this
cast aspersion on the process?
Halachically, well, what they argue about is as follows: who pays the mashgiach? If it's the store which pays the mashgiach, there are many rabbis who are unhappy with that. And they say the mashgiach should be hired not by the store, but by the kashrus agency. This is a difference between the Rabbanut and the Mahadran Hechsherim. In the Rabbanut, the mashgiach is paid by the restaurant, by the by the caterer, and that gives the restaurant owner and that gives the caterer some leverage, some influence over the mashgiach. In the Mahadran Hechsherim, the mashgichim are paid by the Kashrus organization, and that makes it more difficult for the owner of for the caterer to put pressure on the mashgiach.
So what happens if the kashrut agency is paying the mashgiach, but the agency charges the caterer?
Yeah, of course. That's where they get the money from. Correct.
But that's still too indirect. Like the
Therefore,
mashgiach is still then being paid by
therefore, the caterer does have some leverage. The caterer does have some influence over the hashgacha organization, and there's constant, ongoing battles between the food suppliers and the kashrus agencies. The kashrus agencies always want higher standards. The food producers always want lower standards, and there's constant ongoing tension, and well, they reach compromises.
Thank you.
Dov, then let us pause with this. I wish you a good week and a safe week, and eventually a good Shabbos, and look forward to seeing you all again next week. Until then, shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Thanks so much.
It sounded, I just wanted to confirm, it sounded like it was very important that it was in writing, because then it could be provable. Is that why?
Correct. Email would be as good, I think. Email or
right.
fax.
Right, because then it's like, then it's
a WhatsApp message would also be the trick.
Wow. Because there's something that people feel like, okay, I'm really like, if I'm putting this here, then I'm.
People put in writing, they're more serious about. Correct.
You will. Have a great day. Shabbat shalom.
You.
Thank you.
You too. Bye.